All right. So I think we have spent a lot of time this morning talking about AI, talking about cyber resilience. And again, one of the things that, you know, stuck with me was when you looked at the presentations from Rajiv and all the data he presented, you heard a lot about, observability in the public cloud. You heard a lot about, cyber resilience in the public cloud. So today I'm going to double click in my presentation on really, going behind the hidden costs, right? And essentially, you know how you essentially go and optimize costs, especially when it comes to secondary data, right? And if there's one thing I would like you guys to go away with at the end of this presentation, it's going to be that we at Commvault and Clumio, we have essentially built your platform after years and years of engineering and R&D work, so that we can essentially take away the heavy lifting of this from you in terms of observability of the of your secondary data, and also be able to essentially relieve you from going and doing the heavy lifting on cost optimization and things like that. So if there's one thing you want to take away, it's that, right? So we all know, right, customers want to spend less money in the cloud. Not a big surprise to everyone in this room. This is just a common thing that we hear from everyone in terms of looking at the secondary data, that they're all surprised at the amount of you know increase of secondary data and how much cost it takes to essentially protect their environments, right? So let's go into it and double click on it. So 84% of of the organizations that we have talked about in a lot of research, they essentially talk about managing cloud spend being their number one problem, right? Managing cloud spend is the number one problem. And within that, right, obviously it's across their environment, but within that, the bigger one is really around secondary data, right? And why is that, right? Let's go and double click on why is that. And there's three simple reasons for it. Number one, as we talked about in the rapid fire trivia question, it's really around all the AI and analytics boom that is happening. A lot of you folks are going and essentially building agentic and AI applications in your enterprise, or using agent applications, and all of these are ultimately built in the cloud. So all of that essentially ultimately comes with a lot of secondary data that now you need to worry about. And the growth of the secondary data is something that you need to worry about, and the costs of the secondary data is what you need to worry about. So that's number one. Number two is the regulatory compliance needs that come with it, which again get even more with AI applications out there. And this is your GDPR, CCPA, right? All of HIPAA and all of those things that really require you to essentially worry about the secondary data costs. And lastly, the cloud vendors make it very easy for us to essentially go and have snapshots in our environment and just enable snapshots and things like that. And but ultimately, the governance of those snapshots and the lifecycle management of the snapshots is essentially something that you need to worry about. So that essentially also becomes another thing that adds to the cost in terms of secondary data, right? So these are three reasons that we can think of, right? And then, as we essentially heard in Rajiv's presentation also, is one of the things that makes cloud powerful is also something that makes it hard to manage, which is the speed and freedom. So teams can essentially spin up resources, which is the whole idea of the cloud, and it's great for the business. But it also means that before you realize that, wait, what I'm actually running out there, the answer is already too complicated and too late, and you have essentially spent a bunch of money, right? And it's not just one team doing this, right? Typically, you have across most organizations, you have engineering, DevOps, data science, business units. They're all operating in their own lanes and essentially, creating their own accounts, making their own decisions. Nobody's doing anything wrong. Fundamentally, they're just moving fast, which is exactly what cloud was designed to. Like, we have customers who have hundreds or thousands of accounts in the cloud, across their environment, and this is what causes the secondary data to also bloat. So the problem is, when you zoom out of this whole thing, and you try to get a complete picture on what's running, what's being backed up, what's it all costing, that picture doesn't exist, which is the observability problem that we heard in the previous presentation. And the costs are also scattered across all of the accounts. They are allocated to different cost centers, and nobody has the full view. And here's the thing, right? You cannot optimize what you can't see, right? Fundamentally, you cannot make smart decisions about your backup spend if you don't even know everything that's backed up in the first place. And this is the problem we're going to dig into. And more importantly, we are essentially going into what good looks like and how you actually solve this. So now the other thing on top of it, right? If any of what I said resonated, I can tell you that it gets even more complicated as most organizations are running more than one cloud. Again, we saw that data in Rajiv's presentation. Maybe you started off on AWS, but again, maybe you made an acquisition that runs on Azure. Maybe there is some cool little service that you like in Google Cloud. And before you realize, you are a multi-cloud environment, right? And each of those environments obviously has its own backup tools. They have their own console, they have their own billing, they have their own way reporting, and of course, they don't talk to each other, right? And then you are trying to answer a simple question: are all my critical workloads protected? And then again, you have to go and log into multiple consoles, pull up reports from multiple tools. And by the time you have done all this, something has changed, right? And so having more tools doesn't mean more protection. It often means you have more gaps when it comes to your cyber resilience posture. This is where visibility has to come before optimization. You need to essentially have a full view and really understand across all of your multi-cloud environments on what is protected, by what degree, and how much you're really paying across the board. So now, as we go in, right? So let's, we have painted a picture in terms of how things can get out of control, right? Teams moving fast, siloed activity, complexity, data that just keeps growing. But the good news is between the Commvault cloud platform and Clumio, as you saw in Elliot's keynote presentation, we can essentially go and solve this for you. And I'll give you a couple of marquee customers examples and how they've essentially solved it at massive scale later in the presentation. But then the organizations that are winning on cloud backup costs aren't necessarily spending less on protection. They are essentially being smarter about it. They have the visibility, they have the governance, and they have made a handful of deliberate decisions that ultimately make a big difference at scale. So what are the ways in which you can essentially go and do this, right? So obviously, a single most effective way of reducing cloud backup costs is essentially to store less stuff, right? But again, easier said than done, because you got to do what you got to do, right? So the starting point, as we talked about, is visibility. You need to know what's out there, every snapshot, every backup copy across every account and every environment. And until you have that inventory, you're essentially trying to clean a house that you've never walked through, right? Now, once you have that view, the next question is, does it actually need to exist? You'd be amazed how much backup data organizations are paying for that they've never even used. Example, orphan snapshots. I could be having orphan snapshots from servers that I essentially are decommissioned, a few months ago, right? Duplicate copies, backup of dev and test environments with the same retention. Do I really need that, right? Again, all this adds up to real money, right? So it's about being deliberate, right? Not every workload needs the same amount of protection. Not every copy needs to live in a high performance, scalable storage, right? You can essentially go pick and choose what needs to go in archive, what needs to be in standard, and so on and so forth, right? So the mindset shift here is going to be about not from like backup everything just in case, to protect what matters at the right cost tier for exactly as long as needed to maintain my cyber resilient posture. This is where the savings will come from. Now, this last slide was about reducing the volume of data, right? This one is about making sure that the data you do need to keep isn't costing more than it should, right? Because how you store the backup data matters as much as how much of it you're storing, which is where incremental backups, right? Don't keep a full copy. You do incremental backups when needed. Use things like deduplication and compression. These things can work hand in hand. Deduplication will make sure you don't have redundant blocks of data, and compression will come on top of it and essentially compress the amount of data you need, right? This together can reduce your backup storage footprint significantly. Then use native APIs. Cloud native APIs are sometimes very powerful, and when used the right way, you can essentially optimize your infrastructure and put less strain on your running workloads, right? And this is something that requires a lot of engineering and thought to do. And lastly, you optimize how you write the data, right? For example, we at Clumio, right, we kind of figured out that yes, if I can combine a lot of S3 objects together and pack them, I can essentially do it in one write and get charged for 128K versus kind of, backing up 16K at a time. So just things like that, right? But these things at scale have massive, massive benefits. So all of these things combined can help you essentially reduce costs. Next, time, right? The most precious resource you all have is essentially time. And so this here is something that it doesn't show up in a bill, but it's absolutely a cost. It's just the human time kind of maintaining all of these things. Backup administration is tedious, manual, right? And it's spread across teams. So we need to go and get that time back. And this is something where we have spent a lot of time to make sure that you're essentially the heavy lifting is off your shoulders and the platform just takes care of everything, right? For example, we talked about discovery, right? Remember everything we said earlier about the siloed teams, multiple accounts, resources, and all of those things. So the first step is about essentially having a tool that allows you to discover, new resources, gaps that are there in environment, everything that you need to know about your environment. So that's one. And again, our platforms is very sophisticated tools to discover. Next is the integration with the tools that you all use on a day-to-day basis, right? We need to be in a place where we are integrating. So if you have DevOps pipelines and so on and so forth, we're essentially integrating with all of your tools so that you don't have to go do the heavy lifting of integrating that we can do ourselves. Next, using AI to make tasks easier, right? Policies that are AI driven and give you recommendations on what you should be doing based on your own recovery histories and so on and so forth. So leveraging AI in a way that direct you so that essentially you can save costs. And lastly, support, right? When we built the Clumio platform, we essentially made support as essentially a proactive platform where we automatically detect issues going on, and we are able to go and triage those issues and even sometimes close them if there's not worth your attention, right? Or and notify you in cases where it needs attention. So automate all the support stuff and triage those things automatically. Sorry. Yeah. So essentially now it comes to the efficient recovery, right? This is a key thing, right? You want to be able to be very efficient in terms of how you recover your data. For example, if I need to do a granular restore, I need to do a granular restore. I don't need to go and do a full restore. Number one. Number two, I maybe I can do it in place, right? I don't need to essentially go a separate copy, because if I create a separate copy, again, I'm paying for extra costs. Go point in time, right? I need to pick the point in time that I need to go recover at, and then also make sure the data is clean and I'm able to go and essentially doing a clean copy of recovery. So all of these things can essentially make sure that you're doing it efficiently, right? Recovery has to be efficient. So at the end of the day, as I talked about, right, we, between Clumio and the Commvault Cloud, we have all of these things covered for you, right? So if you think about the way we have built the platform, right, there's one console for everything. You have essentially centralized policies, right? You have essentially ways of scaling without limits. Like the architecture we have built in the Clumio platform is Lambda-based architectures, right? This allows you to essentially scale, beyond your wildest imagination. As your workloads are scaling, this architecture just scales, and it scales without spending an arm and leg in terms of costs. And this is how we have built the platform so that it scales with your workload, right? Reporting, make it one click. Billing, being very consumption oriented. You can exactly see which workload, how much you're spending, and where are you spending, where's the money going. All of this essentially is integrated with you for you in the platform, right? So you don't have to, again, do the heavy lifting. So let's take a couple of examples as I promised you, right? And if these companies, I'm going to talk about two companies, one enterprise company, Atlassian, and I'll talk about a consumer company next. But if these companies can do it at the scale they can do it, I can tell you, you can do it too. Let's take Atlassian as an example. I'm sure, most of you have used Atlassian, Confluence, Jira type products. All of the Atlassian, Confluence, and Jira in the public cloud is backed up by the Clumio platform, right? And this is massive environment. These are 30 petabyte plus environment across an application natively built on top of S3, and it's growing at the rate of 100 terabytes per day. And Atlassian had a choice. They could basically go and do it themselves if they go and spend a 40 50 people team over multiple years and maybe try to build a solution, or basically leverage the platform with all the goodness I talked about in the last 15 minutes and just leverage the platform. So they decided to go with Clumio, and as a result of that, they essentially are able to protect their environment. They're essentially able to achieve their RTOs. They're essentially, they're a big Terraform shop. They're essentially able to automate everything, with Terraform. We have, we support Terraform natively in the platform. They're able to essentially, APIs, everything is APIs. They don't even come to the UI. They're able to essentially monitor everything with APIs. And if something happens, get triggered, they integrate with the Clumio APIs and so on and so forth. So at massive scale, a customer running globally, a 30 petabyte environment growing at 100 terabyte plus, and billions of objects, billions. I'm talking about 60, 70, 80 billion objects out there. They're essentially being protected with the Clumio platform in the cloud. So this is the kind of stuff I'm saying. So this is something that takes many years and many engineers to go and do. So I say that don't try this at home. What I really mean is this is not worth your time. You can essentially go and spend your time building your business and what matters, and leave the heavy lifting to what we do really well at cloud scale. I'll give you one more example, right? This is more of a consumer example. This is a company called Duolingo. I'm sure most of you folks who have tried to learn a new language might have used this app. But again, the Duolingo application behind the scenes is a big user of DynamoDB, right? And of course S3 behind the scenes. And they were not able to essentially keep more than 7 days, dailies, and there were full copies from a DynamoDB perspective, right? With the Clumio platform, they're able to do incrementals for 30 days now, save over $1.5 million a year in terms of their costs, right? Again, this is also massive scale. They're doing it for S3 also now. And essentially, they do constant, DR tests with the click of a button. They want to be able to be in a position, because again, what's the biggest threat to an application like Atlassian running in the cloud or a Duolingo running in the cloud? It essentially is, a ransomware attack. So you want to be able to, in the event of an attack like that, you want to not only be able to recover, you want to be able to recover really fast with the click of a button. The time of recovery really matters. And these customers test us on this because that is their Achilles heel. That is what will essentially cost them the business, right? And that requires an architecture to be built, which is not only scalable in terms of backup, but also scalable in terms of recovery, which is what we have done over many years across many engineers and build technologies for. So that's the kind of stuff you get with the platform, so that in the event of an attack, you are covered. So again, I'll end with what I started with. The goal of what we have built is essentially to give you something that takes all the heavy lifting off you, give you the right cyber resilience posture, and ultimately, because of how we have built it, do it at a price point that you cannot match. Thank you very much.